world is completely saturated with social media as consumers become more dependent on services such as Facebook and Twitter for both personal and business purposes. But what impact is this having on society? Technology companies and marketers, of course, advocate social development and claim that it is necessary to move humanity forward. Although privacy activists have raised concerns over the data that is collected and shared across the web, the general public's usage of social networks does not suggest that it is very bothered. And this is exactly what worries Andrew Keen, the author of new book Digital Vertigo, How Today's Online Social Revolution is Dividing, Diminishing, and Disorienting Us. And he has long taken the stance that the current internet culture is having an adverse effect on society. And with his latest book, he targets social media and the negative impact that it could have. And Keen is joining us right now by way of Skype to talk about his new book and his unique perspective. Thanks so much for being with us today, Andrew.
Well, thank you, Abby, for having me on the show.
You're very welcome. Well, you have been labeled as the net's supreme cyber grump, the Antichrist of the Silicon Valley, and many other nicknames for your views on the internet. So why are you so against today's internet culture, and particularly the social web?
Well, do I look grumpy to you?
No.
Not really very grumpy. I'm a cheerful pessimist, I think.
Good way to put it.
Well, I have a cautionary note. Digital vertigo is a warning about the loss of privacy, of the inner self that social media is doing to us. So I wouldn't say that I'm against the internet. We're doing this interview over Skype. I'm on Twitter. I'm on email all day. I have all the same devices that everybody else has. I recognize that the web is the dominant reality in social, cultural life, economic life of the 21st century. But that doesn't mean that we should accept it unthinkingly. So I think that we need to try and make the internet more habitable.
Right. Well, let's get into some of these issues. What has brought on this dangerous form of digital narcissism that you reference in your book?
Well, human beings have always been narcissistic. It's one of the features, to use a computer word, of the species. The Greeks were the ones who invented the term narcissism, and throughout our history as a species, I think we have suffered from often an excessive love of the self. In America, of course, narcissism has been very much of a central feature in the culture. Christopher Lasch wrote about it in the 60s before anyone had even thought of the internet. So the internet didn't invent narcissism. But on the internet, it enables, particularly social media, a personalized broadcast platform, which really perpetuates and amplifies and exaggerates narcissism. And as we retreat from real social things, and as we retreat from reading or watching or listening to other people's ideas, music, movies, books, we seem to be more and more preoccupied with broadcasting ourselves. And that, I think, is deeply narcissistic and ultimately doesn't reflect well on us as an individuals or collectively as a species. What did you have for breakfast this morning, Abby?
A banana.
Exactly. Is that interesting?
Not exactly. That's a good point.
The fact that you had a banana or that I had a muffin, most people are broadcasting incredibly inane material, or material that's kind of silly or pointless or destructive to themselves by posting lots of photographs of their children or more and more intimate details of their personal life, destroying their inner world, their privacy. So it doesn't really benefit anyone.
But you say that online sharing is killing our species and that we've lost what it is to be human by living so publicly, which these are very, very bold statements.
I'm not saying that the internet's killing our species or that social networking is killing our species. What I am saying is that we need to make the internet more suitable for human beings. And the history of mankind for the last few hundred years has been on the cultivation of the self, of the inner world. And I'm worried that the sort of what I would call the new collectivism of the social age, groupthink, the publicness of much discourse, is resulting in losing something essential about what it means to be human. That's what worries me. It doesn't mean the killing. The killing of the species is absurd. And of course, the species always adapts to technology. There's no doubt about that. Our species is remarkably adaptive and flexible. But that doesn't mean that we can adapt to anything and everything. And I do think we're at a moment now in social media where we need to think a little bit more carefully and critically about how we use it, where to draw the line, and how we maintain the sanctity of our inner worlds, our inner life.
What about the impact that social media has had in the Middle East and Occupy Wall Street and other movements like these? What are your thoughts on these? Are these good uses, in your opinion?
I think they are good uses. In the book, I make it clear that I support, or I'm sympathetic, and I admire the way in which social media has been used to topple dictators in the Middle East, the way it's being used to challenge Putin in Russia. I'm sympathetic, obviously, to the way in which social media activists are using technology and the internet in China. But at the same time, one of the problems, I think, with social media is it isn't very social. It's really just an aggregation of individuals. So it's perhaps not surprising that the Occupy movement or the movements in the Middle East haven't really matured into coherent, viable political movements. And the other side of the coin of social media are the London riots, kind of anarchy, chaos. And one could argue that in some ways, the London riots are a more accurate reflection of the atomized, highly individualized, and often destructive nature of social media than the revolutions in Cairo or the Occupy movement. The Occupy movement, in particular, is an aggregation of individuals which hasn't really developed into a coherent political movement. And I think that's both a cause and an effect of the radically individualized nature of social media, particularly in America.
So then do you think all of this online social behavior is negatively impacting consumers' actions offline then, their social interactions?
Well, that may have been a Freudian slip. You talked about, you mean consumers or citizens? Because they're citizens rather than consumers.
Well,
consumers
yes.
buy, citizens act.
That's true. That's true. Citizens is what I meant to say.
Right. Well, but that's one of the problems, is people are often confusing citizens and consumers.
This is true.
And I think in some ways social media treats us all not as citizens, but as consumers, as people with, sort of universal rights of some sort over the product. The problem, of course, on the social web is that we think of ourselves as consumers, but the reality on networks like Facebook is that we're the product.
Right.
So that's the tragedy. That's the film noir element in the narrative. That's why I call my book Digital Vertigo. It's all built off Alfred Hitchcock's great 20th century movie Vertigo, which was a film noir about an innocent man who got swept into a terrible series of crimes. In a peculiar kind of way, a similar thing has happened to all of us in the 21st century.
Well, do you believe that Facebook's IPO disaster is proof of these things that you're saying?
No, I take Facebook very seriously. Facebook's IPO disaster, I think, reflected both poor planning on the part of Wall Street and the banks, and a certain kind of arrogance on the part of Facebook that it can break all the rules. But no, I think that Facebook is a real company. I think social media is real. It's not just a bubble. There are always bubble elements. And whether or not Facebook is worth 60 or 70 or $100 billion is not really a subject that particularly interests me. But it's worth a lot of money.
Right.
It is the new platform, the new front door. We're seeing a shift from a Google-centric economy of links to a Facebook-centric economy of likes. So yeah, I wouldn't write off the public relations disaster of the Facebook IPO and say, well, all social media is a bubble. That's wrong. And there's a massive, I don't like this word, but I can't think of another one, ecosystem of other companies, other social companies, which have investments from angels and VCs. They may not go public. I'm not sure what the mood is in the public markets. But these are real companies changing our behavior, changing how we watch TV, changing how we eat, changing how we travel, changing how we interact with doctors, how we educate ourselves, how we read. So this is a profound change. Social media is not a bubble.
Right. Well, social media, it has worked its way into governments and many legal proceedings at this point. Do you see this as dangerous in this merger?
I don't think it's dangerous. I think government is very slow. I think the problem in America in particular is the government has become archaic. It's trailing behind. The smartest people, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Reid Hoffmans of this world aren't going into government. They're going into startups. And we need to figure out a way to reinvigorate government, to make smart people go back into it, and to enable it to keep up with technology. At the moment, government's essentially irrelevant in America. It's a sideshow. It's something that irritates us. But the real action's in Silicon Valley. The real action is the way in which companies like Facebook and Google are changing the world.
So what do you think would be a solution for this current predicament?
I think there are a number of solutions. I'd like to see government try and catch up and become a little more active. Some of the initiatives coming from within government, particularly Europe, the right to forget legislation, do not track. I think these are interesting and probably necessary, but government needs to be more proactive, faster, more aggressive. I think we all have a responsibility as social media users to understand that when we reveal everything about ourselves, when we turn ourselves inside out, we are impoverishing ourselves. We're taking away the best part of ourselves, the mystery, the internal mystery of what it requires to build personality. I think that there are more and more market opportunities. I'd like to see more companies like DuckDuckGo, EveryMe, Reputation.com, companies that are really focusing on privacy and protecting the individual. And I'd like to see new technologies, particularly technologies focused on the degeneration of data. If we're going to really humanize the web, data needs to degenerate. The biggest problem at the moment with the internet is it hasn't learned how to forget. If we are to civilize the internet, make it a habitable place for the 21st century, we need to teach it how to forget.
That's a good point. So, besides those things, what is your ideal vision for the future of the internet and social networks?
My ideal vision would be for them to be significant, to enable us to connect with people that we otherwise wouldn't connect with people that we are not, our loved ones, our friends who don't happen to be in the same vicinity. But to also maintain the physical, to understand that really meaningful friendships can't really be replicated online, that the complexity of physical relationships, of friendship, needs to have an offline, not an element, but really to be developed, I think, offline. And as I said, to civilize the internet, to enable it to forget. I think most of all, we need to make it habitable, because otherwise, if we don't, there's going to be a real reaction. People say I'm the Antichrist and a Luddite. I'm not. I'm an ex-Silicon Valley entrepreneur. I'm involved in technology every day. I'm on these networks all the time. I like my devices. But unless we clean this thing up, unless we make it more civil, more habitable, I think we are risking a massive Luddite reaction of kids. The generation after this generation are going to perhaps react much more aggressively than I've ever done. A generation of antichrists. We don't want that.
All right, Andrew Keen, thank you so much for speaking with us today. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Abby. I appreciate it too. And my book is Digital Vertigo.
That's right. The book is called Digital Vertigo and is available at all major bookstores as well as online. I'm Abby Johnson with this report.